Hello everyone, welcome back to our MC2 series, our webinar series, our third in a series of 4 webinars that we're bringing to you from Dopkins to share with you a little bit about our views on how to manage through the managed care environment that's quickly emerging within our industry. Today we're going to talk about organizational changes. It's, as we mentioned, the third in our series. As you recall, we did work through the first one. Bill did that about a week ago now. We talked about the importance of identifying and managing our costs, and he talked a little bit about budgeting, zero budgeting specifically, perhaps a new idea for many of us. Last week, Thursday, we talked about optimizing performance. We shared with you a few tools that might be helpful in optimizing performance within your agency, specifically activity-based costing, process mapping, and some other tools like fishbone analysis to help drill down into root causes. Today, as we mentioned, we're going to talk about organizational change. That in and of itself is a pretty deep topic. These webinar series, as you know, have been more of an orientation to this strategy. I should note at this point that we are planning in a few months or so a follow-up series where we will be offering another half-hour webinar on a few topics specifically aimed at drilling down further into some of the tools we've been introducing over the course of this past 2 weeks. But as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about organizational changes. And that, as I said, I started to say anyway, is a very involved topic because organizational change in and of itself is very difficult for many organizations. Change management is a term that we often associate with that, and we will be talking a little bit about that as we go through. Specifically, I guess, maybe just to get the ball rolling here, one example, or maybe 2 examples of organizational change that might resonate with a few of us here today. Social workers, for example, in this new world may have to get more knowledgeable and intimate with budgeting, or at a very minimum have to learn how to collaborate, perhaps, case management with budgeting department. Because as things change and costs become fixed and reimbursements are fixed as well, understanding, even at the social worker level, is going understanding costs at that level is going to be equally as important as it is to the fiscal department. And then perhaps a second example might be, again, just to get the ball rolling here, let's assume you're a residential house manager, and maybe the way things have been done historically is that we've been accustomed to purchasing equipment, supplies, based on when we may need that for our own needs at the house which we manage. But in this new world, perhaps a centralized purchasing might make some sense. Bill and I were talking about this a week or 2 ago, and I guess perhaps sensitive to the snowstorm. But let's say, for example, during that snowstorm, those homes down in the southern tier decided to go out and buy snow blowers without going through a central purchasing area. Well, we might all of a sudden end up with a series of numerous snow blowers which may not necessarily be needed. So anyway, organizational change, a topic that we're going to talk about today. And then finally, again, next week, or I should say next Thursday, 2 days from now, Bill will conclude our series in a discussion with the monitoring, audit, and follow-up. Again, a very important piece of the puzzle. By now, we're hopeful that you're starting to see the sequential nature of what we're talking about here. In fact, today, as we go through this, it might even become more apparent because we are going to use an example of something that seems to be resonating again with a lot of agencies as change occurs, and that will hopefully illustrate in a little more detail what we've been talking about here for the past 2 or 3 sessions. So without further ado, let's get started. We have a lot to cover again in this next half hour, and hopefully we can get it all completed for you. Thank you again for attending this session today, and we hope you get a lot out of it. So organizational change. Once we enter, well, let's back up. Once we understand our costs and we decide that we need to do something about those costs, in other words, we really can't necessarily change them, what can we do within our agency to make things better. And we discussed last time that we would enter into what we call a performance optimization mode, where we're looking for ways to improve and ultimately leverage our resources better. And I guess as we now talk about organizational change, what we're really talking about, once those performance optimization activities are pursued, we may find that some kind of change within the organization may make some sense. For example, redefined roles, responsibilities, service delivery models perhaps, are all options when we're trying to meet the changing demands of the people we serve. Well, how are we going to do this? Well, through collaboration. Obviously, by working together, 2 agencies, 3 agencies, whatever, or even internalize it, 2 homes, 3 homes, whatever the case may be, a collaborative approach to how we provide services is something that may be a result of an organizational change. Shifting staff responsibilities, we sort of alluded to that just a couple minutes ago when we talked about social workers perhaps having to get in tune, just at the surface anyway, in terms of budgeting techniques and the importance of budgeting. And then finally, acquiring new needed skills. Certainly that's the name of the game. And again, this fits into what we've been talking about for a while, this continuous improvement culture that, again, Lean has been so much about. So perhaps to illustrate this a little bit, let me give you a couple examples here. One of the benefits of what we do here at Dopkins is that we kind of view our own firm as a laboratory, if you will, and some of the things that we talk about we actually test out within our own ranks. And we refer to this exercise of improvement called PIT, Process Improvement Team, and it just sort of has become sort of an acronym that we've used when we refer to any kind of an improvement project that we decide to pursue. Back in the mid-2000s, somewhere around 2005, 2006, the accounting profession was going through a change because the mandates, if you will, for education to become a CPA was changing to a 5-year requirement, and there was a little blip for a period of time where there was a shortage of senior accountants. The 3-year accountant that really is the glue of what we do. They're the ones out in the field interfacing and making sure jobs are occurring. So we knew we couldn't do anything about that, so we needed to pursue ways to improve. And one way that happened is we went through, again, a process improvement or a performance optimization study and found out that one way to solve the problem was to collaborate better with our clients and make sure that schedules aligned so that when we were to be out in the field, the client was waiting for us and prepared. We also asked our staff accountants, these would be the 1-year people, to actually learn new skills to be able to serve in the role of a senior accountant, not quite ready for that actual role officially, but enough to get them to a level of performing at a higher level more quickly. So again, just by way of example, an organizational change, a structural change within our own organization, which really did help that year. Another example is we were working with a church at one point. And as you know, in a lot of churches, collections are somewhat stagnant. You know, people aren't attending as much. And with all the functions that happen, extracurricular activities within a church, there's often the issue, well, who's going to clean up or who's going to set up? And the janitorial staff is generally working, 8 to 5, let's say, and not there without at least incurring overtime, additional cost after hours. So through a process of organizational change, decided that the use of volunteers would be a good solution, an organizational structural change. And the volunteers were put into a volunteer group called MASH. And basically their job was to come in and in their ministry, if you will, to try to help at no cost, frankly, cleaning and setting up. So again, because of a necessity for change, because of a necessity of constraints that are sometimes not managed or can't be eliminated, organizational changes have to occur. And that's really, again, what we're going to be talking about today. So going back to our little homework assignment, don't worry, nobody's going to be asked, not that we could anyway, because we're all virtual. But the slide that we presented last week should be showing up on your screen right now. And I'm hopeful, in fact, I would be pretty confident that when you work through this, when you read this, and we'll go through this together, that it was probably a second nature approach, that these are things that perhaps even you and your own families have encountered or something similar. Yet when it applies to the agency, it might not be as obvious because we've been living in this world of whatever our costs are, let's submit it and get reimbursed. Managed care is a little different, as we know, and this is an example from a family situation, the metaphor that we introduced back last week with Bill. So as the story continued, the family was growing with changing individual needs. We promised our daughter she could attend a private school. And then the son was committed to travel sports. And if there are any parents out there with children, they know that both of those promises can be quite demanding on a family budget. In addition to that, let's assume that there were some tax law changes. Again, the property tax increases, health care law changes, all of which affects the family budget. Nothing you can really do about it unless we decide as a family that daughter and son are not going to be able to do those two neat things. In this case, we're assuming that those are the immovable initiatives. Those are things that we want to do. And then finally, unfortunately, Dad's take-home pay, again, is stagnant because there's no new contract in place. And so all of those things working together affecting the family budget. And as we're going through this, make the shift, a mental shift, to how it might apply to the agency, because we will be doing that in just a couple minutes here. So as the story continues, let's discuss maybe some of the things that you came up with. So how will the family budget be affected? Well, certainly we'll be losing dollars. Dollars not only staying even, but perhaps going in the opposite direction. And the other thing that's interesting is the effect of son and daughter having those two initiatives of travel sports as well as a private school really is almost analogous to one of the people we serve, and again, we talked about this last time, the personal outcome measures. These would be specific outcomes that our son and daughter, in this case, would want to do, and much similar to people we serve. So with that being said, how can we provide the services not only to those folks, but also to the agency as a whole, and in this case to the family, and still be able to do that? So there obviously would have to be choices to make. So what choices might those be? And could the family also do things differently to help the situation? Choices. Well, something needs to change to reduce the cost. This is where this quote-unquote process improvement or performance optimization comes in, even at the family level. Perhaps shopping at thrift stores for certain items might make sense. Dad may need to brown bag his lunch and save $10 a day on going out to lunch. There might be other cutbacks on the family budget, all which are subordinated to the two immovable initiatives of the people we serve, our son and daughter in this case. Entertainment, gifts, for example, those might be other items that might be diminished in budget. And then finally, the family structure. Certain things may change in family structure, and perhaps this is the segue now to our topic for today. What might have to change in the family to allow these choices to be made? Well, mom may have to go to work. Let's make the assumption that she's a stay-at-home mom right now. She may have to go back to work. Dad may need to take on a part-time job. He may need to learn new skills and maybe perhaps change careers where maybe a higher level of income is possible. The kids may have to take part-time jobs to help. There's this thing called co-op grocery shopping where maybe they could reduce budgetary items by collaborating with other families. Dad could carpool, for example. So I'm carefully choosing these words if it's not obvious, because as you can see, all of this does relate to organizational changes we introduced just about 10 minutes ago in terms of our agency structure, that as we pursue optimizing our performance within our agency because of cost constraints, organizational change may be necessary. And always in the back of our mind, we'll address this a little bit later, we have to be sensitive to the fact that organizational change is not always easy. So let's apply this now. These principles that we just articulated with the family, let's apply this to an agency. So to illustrate this, we've noticed within our practice here with some of the clients we've been working with that there's an emerging opportunity to optimize performance by adopting a shared administrative service model. So we're going to use this for the remainder of the 15 minutes here to illustrate how an agency such as yourself may use the tools that we've already introduced and how that may lead to an organizational change which may be beneficial to you in dealing with some of the managed care issues that are upon us. So the chronology of events, if you will, may look something like this. There's budget pressures resulting from managed care rate rationalization in some cases. Perhaps a lot of cases you have been dealing with this already, maybe to the tune of millions of dollars of shavings from what you've been accustomed to in the past. And then, so the first step is, again, Bill introduced in our first session, we need to understand the true costs within the new cost categories of rate rationalization. Once we do that, we could then look to optimize our performance. And one way, again, as we mentioned, would be to collaborate with another agency and explore ways to reduce waste and leverage each other's capabilities. One agency may have a strength in a certain administrative service, and it may be complementary to another agency. And then finally, what does that lead to? Well, perhaps a shared administrative service model, which may be beneficial to the whole equation here. So let's see how this works a little bit. I guess before we start with that, let's talk about why an administrative service model may make sense. And again, in context within process or performance optimization. Well, there's perhaps a higher degree of strategic flexibility. What do we mean by that? Well, we all know that this is the end goal of what we're talking about here, is that we don't only want to survive in this managed care world, we want to thrive. We want to be one of those agencies that go into the future with strategic value, a power, a position of strength, let me say it that way. So by having a shared administrative service model, perhaps, it could make sense that that would allow us to grow exponentially without necessarily having to add additional costs to handle the growth. Improve efficiencies of services through standardization. Now this, on the surface, may seem like a contradiction. In fact, when we talk about standardization in process improvement, we get a lot of raised eyebrows. But if you think about it, it does make a lot of sense. Let me use this as an example. We all get our oil changed, perhaps not all of us, but most of us might get our oil changed at one of these shops that do it like within 15, 20 minutes. And if you go get your oil changed, you'll notice, I guess, that each time you go, the process is pretty close to being the same. In fact, if you went to a different vendor, it would probably mirror the one that you did the following or the past time you went if it was a different location. Here's the point. There has to be standardization to eliminate issues of failure. If there wasn't standardization, the mechanic may forget to put the oil filter on, which would cause a big problem. You can fill in the gaps from there. So the question becomes, how can we be standardized and yet still provide custom solutions and outcomes to people we serve? That's exactly the point. By becoming standardized, we can provide quality, repeatability, and that leads to better efficiencies. That same principle applies to providing administrative services. So through standardization, that could actually help us improve and manage our costs in a more efficient way. Elimination of waste, certainly, as we sort of alluded to, we've seen situations where, let's say, a payroll department in one agency has people who are sort of crossing the border to fill in gaps of needed capacity, let's say, in fiscal budgeting. And on the other side of the equation, we may have a payroll department that's redlining and constantly trying to keep up. And so if all of a sudden you have two departments together, one sort of takes care of the other, and it becomes a nice match. So elimination of waste may also be something why a model like this might make some sense. Certainly increasing quality of services, we just alluded to that with the oil change example. And then reducing costs of decentralization. This ties exactly to the example we started with earlier about the decentralized purchasing. When you have a department that's focused, serving many, you can leverage that typically a lot better than having two separate ones. So here's the example. We have now a structural change that's being considered by a couple agencies because they want to manage their costs. They looked to improve and optimize their performance, which led them to a potential strategic change of shared administrative services. So let's see how this might unfold, and maybe there's something in here that you can take away to help you in some of your applications as well. So the first thing we might do is provide an independent feasibility study to show the effects of converting to a shared service model. And there's a few things here we might want to do. Overall, what we're looking to do is to create an as-is pro forma. How do you know if the change makes sense if you don't understand what the current lay of the land is? And again, not to keep beating the same drum here, but this is why it's so critically important to understand the costs that Bill mentioned last week, because we need to have a grip on really what the true costs are of our agencies before we were to entertain some kind of a structural change. So the first step might be conducting an analysis of each agency to determine what we would call the fiscal health. This would be typically something we might do by just getting data from the CFRs and then creating a baseline ratio analysis, for example. That might be the first step. And then number two and this is really very critical, is to gain an understanding of each agency's administrative services that are currently being provided. This is typically done by interviewing the content experts. This goes back to the concept of lean that we talked about last week, where it's all about people doing the work. People understand where the issues are. People understand where the opportunities for improvement. We typically would do an interview. This is something that you could certainly do of the people performing the work, and the interview would consist of things like, what's slowing you down? If you were king or queen for the day, that's always a fun question. What would you change? The answer to that typically gives us some good insight as to where the opportunities for improvement might be. So anyway, the interview is a very important piece of that. The third step, again, we talked about this, it determined the true cost of service delivery, not the general ledger cost. So we have a poll here that's coming up right now, and this is going to talk about performance optimization tools, a sort of a review from last week. So the question is, what performance optimization tool could be used to determine the actual cost of service delivery? The choices are value stream, also known as activity-based costing, a fishbone root cause analysis, process mapping, all of the above are numbers 1 and 3. I'll give you 10 seconds, 15 seconds to answer this, and then we'll discuss it for a little bit. The answers are coming in. Slowly but surely. Okay. About 60–70% of the data is in. Let's take a look at that, see what we've come up with. And it looks like most of you responded that all of the above. And actually, that's not quite right. Good try. It's numbers basically 1 and 3. Fishbone is really a tool. We did discuss that. This may have been a little bit of a trick question, but the fishbone root cause analysis is once you have looked for ways to optimize your performance, the fishbone analysis is a great tool to figure out the root cause as to why some of those issues are occurring. So the key here was determining the actual cost of service delivery. That was great, though. People identified that ABC and process mapping was part of that, and that's very true. So just to recap, for those of you who may not have been here last week, we do have a couple slides here. This is an example of value stream costing. You can see on the left that's a typical general ledger approach. On the right, the costs are split between actual activities, much more useful in identifying where there may be costs that are not being consumed by the actual department in which that person's cost center is. This is that process mapping example, again, illustrating here. Don't worry too much about, again, not reading the squares there, but eliminating the activity. Again, that was something we covered last week. And then finally, this root cause analysis. This is the one that sort of tricked a few people up, but in this case, it's a tool used to figure out essentially the same method as the 5 whys. If there's an issue, what's causing the problem? So again, as it relates to our organizational structure question, this is an important piece because we have to understand the true costs of service delivery, and those were the tools we shared with you last week. So as we continue here with step 1, consider process improvement possibilities that could benefit efficiency, timeliness, and the quality of services. Again, this is where typically that fishbone analysis would be used to figure out root causes and then ultimately ideas for change. And then remember, again, I'll just say it one more time, the lean concept of people, brain over brawn. This is why this is so critical to understand that people are a major part of organizational change. A final step in step 1 here is to develop a list of expectations if a shared model was implemented. Now this is something that is extremely critical, and this is what we would refer to as change management. Because as we discussed a little bit a few minutes ago, change is not easy. And if we do approach some kind of a change or a structural change with our organization, it can be something that is met with some resistance. So what are the things that we would want to consider in this example that we're using to illustrate an organizational structure of shared service model? Well, would both agency custom-specific needs be adequately fulfilled? Is there a software package, for example, that one is using that is a immovable criteria? That would be something that we should be documented and understood. Would any agency policy related to its mission be compromised? So, for example, it might be that one agency does not want to entertain at all the use of outsourced services for whatever reason. So that would have to be understood, because sometimes an administrative service model that's shared could engage in outsourcing, which sometimes helps in the cost structure. What savings might there be compared to the as-is? Again, the as-is true cost, not the as-is general ledger costs. And just to be more specific, the as-is costs under the new model of rate rationalization with the new cost centers that have been provided. And now a couple of the more difficult ones. If savings are realized, could the savings be redirected to program services? This is the big one, because it isn't about cutting costs necessarily. It's about managing our costs, as we've been talking about over the past few seminars here, webinars, and then redirecting those resources to someplace else that may have a higher value. We talked about value versus non-value last time. So redirecting those costs into program services would typically be a good thing that we could consider. And then finally, if the solution that we ultimately are thinking about implementing results in displaced staff, which isn't the intent but sometimes the unfortunate result, are there opportunities for these people in other parts of the agency? The answer to that is typically yes, because as we sort of again alluded to earlier, there are typically folks that are working a little harder than others, not because they're necessarily better people or better employees. It's just that their requirements are greater because they may not have enough capacity. So by allowing people to move around as structure changes, being dictated by managed care changes, sometimes that's something good to think about doing. So these are examples of agency expectations that we would want to consider. Then finally, step 2, provide an independent feasibility study of converting to the shared model. We would want to obviously assess the solutions. Again, once these solutions start coming in, determine the true cost of these potential solutions. Does any of these solutions violate our agency goals and missions? And does the proposed solution, do they meet the expectations that we just articulated earlier? So those are things that we might consider in whether or not this particular change in structure made some sense. So poll number 2, what of the following would you think is or are a common resistance to organizational change? Select all that apply. Fear of the unknown, fear of lack of competence, emotional connection to the old way, and or low trust. Again, we'll give you 10 seconds or so. We're just about wrapped up, and we appreciate you hanging in there with us. 60% in, 70% in. Okay, we'll take a read on that. And yes, looks like everybody has answered pretty similarly. The one that got the most was fear of the unknown. In this case, all do apply, and certainly maybe your responses are indicative of the level of priority of each of these. So the point here would be, and as we wrap up, again, we want to respect your time, the organizational change as mandated because of cost constraints as pursued through performance optimization is not an easy thing. Structural change takes time. It takes time to manage, and it takes some sensitivity, but it's also very needed. It's the third part of MC squared. Again, Dopkins is very happy to help anyone with any of these things. We're very experienced, and we've spent a lot of time researching and studying these topics. So until next Thursday, or this Thursday, right? Bill will be here talking about our compliance piece of this, the final step of MC squared. We thank you for spending your lunchtime with us. Thank you very much.